when I talk about molecular literacy, it's molecular literacy not just with the symbols of the elements themselves as letters, but also then taking it into the third dimension and looking at molecules that are drawn, what most people look at as like stick figures or hieroglyphics, but seeing them as animated characters in a reaction. So there's two levels to molecular literacy, but the first has to start with the alphabet of science, and that's what I call the periodic table now.
Bonjour! Welcome to White Walls! My name is Mathieu Penaud. I am a product manager and learning experience designer, passionate about the role of design and technology in education and learning. In this podcast, I interview inspiring educators, researchers, designers, and innovators to discuss their journey and insights as they imagine and build the future of learning. If you enjoy the show, please share your favorite episode with fellow parents and educators, and make sure you don't miss our next guest by following White Walls on your favorite podcast platform, or even better, by subscribing to White Walls' free newsletter on Substack. Thank you for being part of the conversation, and now, your episode. Hi everyone! Today I am thrilled to be joined by Dr. Colleen Kelley, a fantastic science educator and the creator and founder of Kids Chemical Solutions, a comic book-based curriculum designed to make chemistry accessible and exciting for learners of all ages. Colleen's journey began with a love for chemistry and research, leading her to earn a Ph.D. in chemistry from Penn State University by the age of 24. Over the past 25 years, she's been teaching chemistry, currently at the University of Arizona, all the while asking one big question: why do students think chemistry is so hard? Her answer? Chemistry is a language, one we've never properly taught students to read. From this insight, she coined the term molecular literacy and developed creative new frameworks to help students embrace science learning as a whole and chemistry in particular. In today's conversation, we'll dive into how Colleen is reimagining STEM education by challenging outdated narratives, embracing storytelling, and bringing curiosity and joy back into the classroom. Colleen, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to White Walls.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited. There's so many topics that I want to cover with you, and I think it's going to be a great episode. But before we start, I have a few rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So the goal is for you to answer the first thing that comes to your mind. And if there's anything you want to elaborate on, feel free to do so.
Okay.
So the first question I have for you is, where did you grow up?
Central Pennsylvania, right outside of Harrisburg.
And where do you live now?
Tucson, Arizona.
And I always have loved this question is, who was your favorite teacher?
Definitely my high school chemistry teacher, for sure. Mr. Carr.
What stood out?
He was very animated, and a lot of my inspiration comes from him because he, for example, when he was showing the excitation of electrons to different energy levels, I remember him jumping on a desk, and his vertical leap was like phenomenal. And you could see how much energy it takes for excitation of electron. And then he would come down and throw a ball out to be like an emission spectrum kind of thing. So all of that played into, chemistry being kind of the class that we all looked forward to because he was willing to be vulnerable, right? Like as an educator now, I realize that we're not trained as performers. And to do things like that in the classroom takes courage. And he was always like animating like that. And so I learned a lot about chemistry and imagination from him.
I can see that you still see him.
Yeah.
Visually. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What do you think is one thing that all kids should learn at school?
A love for reading so that they take words from a page and create an image in their mind. I think I really value taking words as two-dimensional and creating a three-dimensional world in your mind. I think that plays into so much of life, and there's so much joy in that. And I recently heard a study, I think it was on the 10% Happier podcast, where reading is the single most activity that we do as humans that is the most restful. So I think there's a lot of beauty to reading. So, but actively reading so that there's that joy and that imagination that comes with creating your own images in your head.
And what is one thing that all adults should learn at work?
How to play. I think there needs to be joy at work, whether it's, if it's March Madness, maybe having, just having the brackets going is super fun, but just doing something outside of your normal job description and connecting with each other in a playful, imaginative way. So whatever that is.
Hmm, I love it. What is your favorite chemical element?
It changes over time, but I have a historical love for manganese. My PhD thesis was on manganese organometallic complexes, so manganese bonded to carbon in a lot of different ways. And I loved working with it because it was colorful. So manganese had an orange band or a yellow band, or you knew if it was brown or green, it was not good. So I love the visual aspect of working with transition metals, but manganese comes to
Hmm.
mind first.
And what is your favorite chemical reaction?
Hmm. I love nucleophilic substitution reactions. I love them because they're easy to tell stories around. And there's this whole, like, there's a leaving group. There's all these characters. There's the size of the alkyl halide or haloalkane, and then there's a leaving group. That's a character. And then there's an incoming nucleophile. And there's so many characters that you can just animate for your students, the nucleophilic substitution reactions.
Awesome. I have to say, when I was in college, my favorite class was actually chemistry. My favorite subject. It was the one I had the most fun in. And
Awesome.
usually, when I answer like who was my favorite teacher, that would be my chemistry teacher from
Yay.
then. So I kind of like I understand that like playfulness in looking at chemical reactions and all of that.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. What is the latest thing you did for work?
Oh, I've just finished facilitating a summer STEM camp for ages 5 to 11. So I did that for a month, and it was so much fun. And I was a little surprised, but so happy that they had never built a fort before. Like, I thought fort building was just like the greatest thing ever. So I made it every day. We would have pillows and blankets and cardboard and big forts, like the whole size of the classroom forts with tunnels. And, I think later on we might talk about dimensional literacy, but this an aspect of dimensional literacy is building big and creating spaces and imagining them from just things laying on the floor. And every day they wanted to build a fort, and I was so happy. And I stepped back and let them build the fort they wanted. So that's the latest thing I've done in my job. So lucky me,
Wow.
right? I get to watch kids build fort, and everything I had not to want to crawl in there with them, but I wanted to make sure I gave them their space, but I definitely wanted to check it out in the inside. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
honestly, I wanna sign up for
yeah,
this
yeah,
camp.
I know, right?
What is the latest thing you did to relax?
Oh, definitely reading. Yeah, reading a book. Yep. I read a book about ice dancers called The Favorites. It was just such a good summer beach read, if you will. But just laying around on, outside and reading that book was very relaxing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for these questions.
Yeah.
It was really fun, and now we're gonna get into the main part of the conversation. And I like to start it with this question, which is how do you feel when you reflect on your journey from where you started to where you're now?
I think about this a lot as a mother, and kind of reflecting on my interactions with my parents as I was about to become a chemist and go on this journey. And at no point were they supportive of this journey. I'm a first generation college student, and my parents, my dad was an insurance agent, my mom worked in a nursing home. So all of this was just not something that you could create a life around. Like, what was I doing, and why was I going to school for so long to do what and do research? But I reflect upon it now because my son's on a similar journey. He's in his early 20s and trying to figure things out. And now I know to be supportive of whatever he chooses. But I also think, I don't know what it was that gave me the fortitude, right, to follow my passion. And if I look back on my journey, I just always followed not only my passion, but my joy. And I was always having fun doing what I'm doing. And I think how blessed I am to never have that conundrum where, what should I do? I don't know what I like, that kind of thing. It was always right in my face, from
Mm,
basically from high school on, that I loved chemistry. So the challenge as a mother is to, when a lot of 20-year-olds don't have that passion right in their face and they're trying to discover it, is I don't have any foundation for that. So I feel very blessed, I guess, is still the word, is that I discovered it and held on to it. And pretty amazed that, decades later, I'm still having so much fun with it. And I still love writing reactions, and I tutor, and when I'm tutoring, I still get excited. So, I mean, I still love it.
yeah, that's great. I would say even as adults, I feel a lot of adults, and kind of like me included, who's still figuring out,
Yeah.
what is that like true joy, passion, that like happy place. That's very like hopeful to see someone who really lives her passion like this. And I'm wondering, how did it start? Like, what do you remember? What was the initial spark?
Well, I loved the class in high school. And so when I went to college, I was a chemistry major because that was my favorite class. And during my freshman year, I had a friend of mine say, I'm going to stay and do research for the summer, but I didn't know what that was. Um, so I just said, "Oh, what is research?" And she said, "Well, you find a professor and you work with them." And I just said, "Okay." So I just sat outside a professor's door. I had seen her. She was a female faculty at the University of Richmond, and she was 29, right out of MIT, and she was driving this old Mustang. So I thought she was super cool. So I just sat outside of her door. This was before email, everyone. So I couldn't email her. I couldn't, there's no other way to contact her but sit outside of her door. So I sat outside of her door and did homework until she arrived at her office. And I just said, introduced myself and said, I would like to do research with you, not knowing anything about anything. So she brought me in her office and showed me these papers and what she was doing. And we talked, and she said yes. And that was really the start of it, because I didn't know that research was doing a chemical reaction that nobody on the planet had ever done before. Like, I thought that was so cool when she explained to me, we're going to extract this hydrogen from iron and make an iron silicon double bond, and no one has ever done that. And I thought, wow, that's cool. So that hooked me, right there, is just the exploration of the unknown.
Mm. It's crazy how I see so many parallels with the teacher that I mentioned before, because she
Mhm.
was so very young. It was like a first year actually teaching, but she was like first in class and like everything that she did before. And she was so very cool. Like I remember one thing when she distributed some papers back, and one time she said there might be some sand in the paper because I was grading them at the beach this weekend. And it's wow, how cool is that?
Yes.
Yeah. But it's funny. I did a project with her where we were actually extracting some molecules from rats' brains
Wow.
and doing some reactions basically with uh, like different molecules to see what was the best way to identify a certain drug in the brain, and that was super exciting. So um, and how like did your vision of chemistry evolve over time? Like how did you look at chemistry at the beginning that sounds like it was kind of something like new and seemed
Mhm.
like playful and interesting. And now when you look at it, like how did that approach or vision evolve over time?
I think the biggest evolution for me was my recognition of what it takes to see chemistry in your imagination, and that needs to be cultivated, and that for most of my students over the last few decades, that was not accessible for them in their imagination. And I wouldn't have known that, because when I started, I could immediately imagine what she was saying, what my professor was saying about this research project, and then from there, when I went to graduate school and whatnot, um, thinking about my research projects was easy to do in my imagination and create, and make hypotheses and twist molecules around, and that's not accessible to most people. So that was a huge
Mm.
realization for me.
And you mentioned before that for you, chemistry, like learning chemistry, is like learning to read.
Yeah.
It's a form of language. Uh, can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, it kind of goes along with the statement I just made about what's accessible and what's not. And so, when I talk about molecular literacy, it's molecular literacy not just with the symbols of the elements themselves as letters, but also then taking it into the third dimension and looking at molecules that are drawn, what most people look at as like stick figures or hieroglyphics, but seeing them as animated characters in a reaction. So there's two levels to molecular literacy, but the first has to start with the alphabet of science, and that's what I call the periodic table now. And that was a huge epiphany for me when I realized that we start teaching the alphabet to kids at about age 2 or 3, and they're writing letters in that time. And when you look at one of a child's like one of their toys are these blocks that have letters in them. And I looked at the one that had the letter C that was a block. I'm like, that's carbon. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, they can do this. They're putting CANT together and spelling cat. So why not put NaNCl together and spell sodium chloride or salt, right? It's the same neural pathway. It's the same way of thought. And once I realized that, I recognize that if we start, and my belief is that the neural pathway exists, it just closes. So if we keep that neural pathway open and allow students to combine elements to make formulas, and then formulas to create equations, and equations to create mechanisms, and have a really solid foundation and confidence in molecular literacy, then that next level of animating the molecules, right, then comes into play. So I
Hmm.
think it's a whole cascade of events that occurs and should occur over a decade, not 1 or 2 semesters, right? It needs a lifetime of refinement.
That makes sense. Yeah, and starting young helps to tap into that inner like, curiosity and that need for young children to describe the environment, like find ways to describe the environment, which they do through language, but they could also do through uh, chemistry. Yeah, that's fascinating. And um, like once you understood that, what led you to create Kids Chemical Solutions, which is this comic book based curriculum that definitely like put that into a concrete uh, solution.
Yeah.
But yeah, how did you come up from that insight to actually creating this solution?
It kind of, there was a merger of ideas that led to the creation of the comic book series. And really, it started when I was a new professor teaching organic chemistry, and really seeing this whole sea of students, 200, 300 students in an auditorium, all overachievers. Nobody takes organic chemistry who's not like, you know, really at the top of their class. They're going to go to medical school or become engineers or, PhD scientists. So it tends to be those kind of students year after year. And very few of them actually do go on to become chemists, but it's a prerequisite for dozens of college majors. So they're there, they're eager, they have earned A's since they could tie their shoes in every other class. And then they get to organic chemistry and they're struggling, and their struggle is defined by their own. I've had students in tears in my office over an 89, or a B plus, and then I have students in tears over a failing grade. So their level of success, I'll leave that up to them, what they qualify as successful. um, but it really made me pause and think, I didn't come from the same background that most of these students came from, right? I was not encouraged to go to college. My parents weren't scientists. So what is it that allowed me to just devour organic chemistry like it was a juicy novel? And these students are struggling. And I don't think it comes down to whatever, being brilliant or IQ or any of those terms. I have no idea what those even mean for in this realm. And I just realized that they were not able to see what I was seeing. And that is a form of illiteracy, right? If I were go to China and look at the street signs, I would be illiterate. And that's a symbolic language. If you handed me a sheet of music and asked me to play on the piano what's in front of me, I wouldn't be able to do it. I'm illiterate. If I watched someone else play the piano, I could probably use my memory to try. And there's a lot of workarounds to fake it. And that's what makes organic chemistry so hard for most students, is because they're illiterate, they find strategies to fake it, right? And those are hard strategies, right? If you're memorizing something just for the sake of that's your, safety net, and that's all you have, it quickly debilitates and falls apart. And so I started to reach my students. I started telling stories. When I realized this, I'm like, they need characters. I need a bridge, right? So back to my nucleophilic substitution reactions, I talked about Piglet being fluorine, and Piglet, like of Winnie the Pooh, would hold on to carbon really tight and not want to leave. And they could imagine that. So I was getting into that space. And then Winnie the Pooh was bromine, who would just wander off in a reaction and not care and be a big, puffy leaving group who was happy to leave. And then I'd relate that to the rates of the reaction and all these other things. But just those visual images of characters that they could relate to really stuck. So then I started developing my own stories, telling them. And, years later, students said, you should publish these stories. We remember them when we're studying for our MCAT, when we're taking our exam. So I started doing that. And that's when I realized the connection with the smaller kids is I was writing comic books, and then I thought, wait a minute, this is something the younger age group could digest as well.
Yeah, oh, that's fascinating. Just want to say, I love the parallel with the music learning as well, because it's also a language that
Yep.
is very different than like the more spoken language, and that can be very complex too, and that children like learn very young for
Yes.
some of them. So that's a great way to say that. It could be the same for molecular literacy.
Yes.
So
Yes.
love that parallel. So what does it look like now? Like its chemical solutions, like what's available? How is it being used?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What is it?
Well, it's a series of 4 comic books, and then with each comic book is a activity bundle, and in that bundle are games, puzzles, all kinds of different activities, and then there's an audio book to accompany it that's in character. So each of my characters has a different voice, and so we've got all of that to accompany it. So what it looks like in my classroom, though, is super cool because when I hand out the books, the kids are sharing them. And the coolest thing to watch is they open the comic books, and 3 of them dive across the table, and they put their nose like right on top of the book. So all 3 of them. And I took a picture of it and I showed it to my son, and he's like, Mom, you know how you can tell kids really are into it? I'm like, how? He's like, their butts aren't in the seat. And I'm like, yeah. And I look around not, they're all laying on the table, and it's like they want to be part of the comic book. Like if they could dive into that world, they would. And so their body language is just showing that excitement. Like, I want to be in this world with these characters. And then they each pick a character, and I don't orchestrate any of this. Um, so their task is to read the comic book and answer questions, and then we have a discussion. But they just, you be Poppy and you be Ray and I'll be Granny Eve and you be Sir Carbon, and they get into character and into voice. And again, I'm not prescribing this. And so when I talk about molecular literacy with this vehicle for learning, it is literacy because they're reading, and they're reading aloud. And reading aloud is a certain form of vulnerability for kids because they're just learning to do it. And if they're willing to go into character and read aloud and stumble over a word with their peers and really kind of get in there, and they help each other, like, no, I think it's this. And I have old timey words, as my kids call it, like calamity. And they're like, Dr. Kelley, what's a calamity? And so I explain it, but it's, so there's vocabulary, and there's just all kinds of cool things that are going on while they're reading it. And when it's time to put the books away so that they can go on to their art class or, English class or math class, they don't want to put them away. They're like, no, one more page. I'm like, you guys, these are here. I'll see you tomorrow. I promise you. So it's that almost like binge feeling, like you feel like with a good Netflix series. They have that with my books, and I just love that. And that was an unexpected result. Um, I was quite sure they were going to become literate and learn chemistry. What I wasn't sure about was all these other juicy nuggets of joy and literacy that came with it.
Oh, that's amazing. And do you see it translate then in when they advance to, I mean, your students themselves that are college students, but you see like that translate in like when they pass chemistry tests and things that are maybe a little more dry because they can have that fun and learning,
Yeah.
with your books, and then they might have to take those tests that are just like more like less fun, obviously.
Yes.
Like, do you see that translate?
Well, the translation's still to be determined because I started using these books with dozens of classrooms right around fourth grade a few years ago. So my oldest adoptees are only just now entering ninth grade. So I haven't had a chance yet to see how that foundational knowledge. So a longitudinal study is definitely needed now that I have the audiences to kind of track to see what happens when they get there. But I do, when if I'm helping students with Gen Chem at the college level, I use my comic books for sure because I've got some cute characters that are polyatomics, and the polyatomics tend to be an area where students just, and then they're like, oh, that's what that looks like. And then they'll remember the character. So it's helpful for all ages.
And what are the teachers' reactions to this approach?
Well, the teachers' reactions are they love it because for a number of reasons. It's as someone who's worked in the elementary ed space myself, it's a very energetic and demanding position to be an elementary ed science teacher because the most of the curriculum that's available to them is so activity based, right? And observational based. And there's very little time for reading, reflection, writing, that kind of thing. So they love that I'm bringing literacy into the science classroom, right? And it's a great way for them to build their students' literacy concomitant with learning about chemistry and science. And the stories are fun and funny. And there are activities and games. We play periodic table twister. There's periodic table baseball. There's an ionic ooze card game that the kids love to play. So there are those, but the teacher can be a little bit more hands off and let the students do it. And
Mm.
so I think it takes away that notion that you're constantly having to be doing. You can be having fun reading and thinking and playing instead of it's much like my fort building, where you can take a step back and watch them and observe them play ionic ooze and see how much fun they're having with it. The
Yeah.
other thing about it is I consider it a green chemistry unit, right? There's no waste from reading, right? The books can be on their shelves forever. The card games last forever, and they're timeless. I mean, these ionic bonding has been taught 200 years ago. I don't know. I made that up, but a long time ago, and it's going to continue. So everything I created is timeless and meant to endure, so that there's no waste. And what my observations from elementary and middle school science is, there's a lot of doing and a lot of throwing away, right?
Mm.
And so when we're talking about green chemistry and trying to be more sustainable, and how can kids learn the most basically from the least, is what I've created.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah. And do you see opportunities for cross-disciplinary activities? Because I feel like at that age, and chemistry in particular feels very siloed and doesn't have like that many bridges with other subjects and disciplines. Do you think that opens more opportunities for that?
I do. Yes, I do. I think, in their units of study, even when they're doing, say they're doing robotics and coding, they've got these little robots, right? Put the robot on a periodic table. The periodic table is a grid, right? So the coding, they have these grids and they have to code. We've got these little robots that are called, I think they're called Edison, and you can program Edison to like go in a square. Well, have them, go from sodium to chlorine across the periodic table, code for that, right? So there's all kinds of ways you can integrate molecular literacy with the other sciences. And then beyond that, my books are all historical. So the first book's about the radium girls, and so it's a unit in social studies and public health, like what happened when the girls were painting the radium onto watch dials and then licking their paintbrushes. Why shouldn't you ingest radium? And what did that lead to? And how we have now laws that help protect us in the workspace because of this. So there's a lot of history. It's timeless. So it can be used in any of their subjects.
Yeah, I really believe in cross-disciplinary, approaches, and I think that this is such a good way to bring chemistry into these other areas too. So, yeah, I love that. Um, and there's something else I want to talk about because you talk about molecular literacy,
Mhm.
but you've also identified um, like five different literacy that you think are very important for STEM learning. And that maybe are not given enough attention at school.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, can you tell us more about what those types of literacy are and like why they are important in your eyes?
Yeah, so I opened my aperture on these science literacies after I discovered molecular literacy and understanding that most college students come to campus and are molecularly illiterate. I began to think, what other types of deficiencies are students coming to college with along these literacy lines? And so I talked with my colleagues at the University of Arizona, and particularly I talked with an NMR spectroscopist. So this is an instrument where you put a molecule in a huge magnet, you get some data, and from that data you can build the 3D structure of that unknown molecule from. So it's kind of, it requires a lot of imagination, but you're going from 2D to 3D. The data you get is presented usually as just a bunch of lines, and you have to interpret those lines into a three-dimensional structure. And as we were talking, we were lamenting that our graduate students were unable to really do this. And it's a critical skill for chemists, especially organic medicinal chemists, for doing this. So we were trying to figure out what it is, and we were going back in time. And this faculty member happened to have young children. We were talking about using blocks and how using just blocks really helps to go from 2D to 3D and 3D to 2D, and just different activities that children can do to build that. again, that's when I talk about words going from 2D, a 2D word, to a 3D imagination. So, and then going back again, right? Can you take what's here and then put it back on a piece of paper and draw in spatial recognition and dimensions? So, dimensional literacy became something that I became also passionate about because of its applicability to not just chemistry, but if you're a surgeon, if you're a dentist, what it looks like on a piece of paper is not look like when they cut inside the body, right? And so all of these engineers, all of them need this dimensional literacy. And again, when we're talking about, we know lots of people that have these professions, but still a small subset of the human population that can do this skill. Um, and then from there, I began to explore, what does it look like when students look at a bunch of numbers that we call data? So, what is a big data set? And can they tell a story? So, it's not just can they use those numbers and put them in a program to spit out a graph, but what is a story? Can you look at this sea of numbers without a graph and imagine the graph and imagine the story? Like, what happens when the temperature increases over time? What happens in this story? So tell the story with numbers. So I just call that like a form of numerical literacy. Like, can you use numbers to tell a story? So those are the three that I think are newer. The ones that have always existed are observational literacy. Are you able to observe something and wonder? That's critical. But I think we do a good job with that. We do lots of demonstrations where students can observe and wonder, and we ask a question after something that they observe. And then beyond that, I think we've really started to do a really good job in evidence-based reasoning. So literacy based on, what is the evidence telling you? So those are the five components. And so when I'm teaching, I'm still making sure that I'm hitting all of those. Have I hit
Hmm.
all five of those? And the reason I think these are so important is I look at enduring, I look at how much the world is changing. And I call these the little black dress of science, right? These five literacies um, existed a long time ago. I'm just now uncovering their significance, and will endure, right? You're always going to need that little black dress no matter where you go. It's a classic Coco Chanel of science, right? So find the classics and build upon those, because if we're trying to teach to our kids' future, we have no idea what we're doing, right?
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
what will they need? And they will need these skills and these neural pathways available to them. So I'm looking for what's enduring and what's essential, as opposed to where they need to go and what their jobs of the future, or teaching for the 22nd century learner, or whatever the buzzword is. That didn't work, and so let's look at what has worked and what is necessary.
Yeah, like the foundations that you have to build early on,
Yep.
so you can build on that, right? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like how the first three, as you mentioned, are all related to storytelling in a
Yes.
way, whether it's the molecular, dimensional, or numeracy, literacy.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. And the dimensional literacy reminds me of the conversation I had on White Walls with Scott Trader,
Yeah.
that I shared with you before, and that is about spatial cognition. There's a lot of work on spatial cognition, and had the exact same like point of view that you're sharing here. That this capability of visualizing things in 3D in your head is critical for
Yes.
science, and that you need to start doing it very early on.
Yep.
And I'm curious if you have maybe an example of an activity or something that young children can do. And I'm thinking also for, I don't know, like for parents who are listening, for example, and they're like, oh, wow, that's important, but what can I do to build up these capabilities, these literacies for my children? Like, what are some activities, some things that they can do with young children that could help?
Sure, yeah, this is a great question. Thank you for asking that. Well, molecular literacy obviously use my curriculum.
Yeah.
So we'll put that one aside.
And I'll put the
Uh,
link. I'll put the link in the
yeah, yeah,
description.
yeah,
So.
yeah. So, but with the dimensional literacy, what I'm experimenting with and doing research with are these challenge questions. And the challenge I would pose to my students is I use, and again, this is with third graders actually. So second and third graders love this. So 7, 8 years old about. Um, there's these set of cars called Matchbox or Hot Wheels. I don't know if the audience is familiar with Hot Wheels or Matchbox, the little like metal cars. And they have those orange racetracks, if you're familiar with those. So I would get out the orange racetracks, and then they have got their connectors. But then also I would provide different they're magnetiles, so the different tiles that are like blocks. So magnetiles those and some tape, and then I give them a ping pong ball, and I would say you need to create a track that takes 10 seconds for the ping pong ball at the start to the finish, exactly 10 seconds. So then I give them a stopwatch too, right? So there's a timeliness to that. And immediately they love to make the track go way down steep, and they time it like that was less than a second. I'm like, I know 10 seconds is a long time when you're trying to get a ball to roll. So there's engineering in that, but there's also just I have them draw it first. So I said, plan it. What are you going to create? So we test first, and they realize that the fun one that looks like a roller coaster doesn't work. And so then we go back to the drawing table literally and say, let's draw something that would extend that. How could you extend that? And so they're sketching it and they're making their drawings. And then they're taking their drawings, that's 2 dimensional, building something in 3 dimensionals, and then testing the affect of what they created and then redrawing it and going back. And I intended this to be, 1 or 2 classes. My classes are 45 minutes. They wanted to do it every day, and they didn't what I loved about it is I didn't have a group succeed for 3 or 4 classes, and it didn't detract from their joy. So many times in school when students don't succeed, they want to quit. I'll just say it. They didn't want to quit. They wanted to keep going. The amount when it's fun and when it's like that, they're grittier than I've ever seen them. And so, anyway, that's an example for parents. It's just something simple like that. And I didn't have an idea in mind. That's the other thing is create challenges that you don't know how to do, because
Mm.
then it makes it fun for everybody. Um, so that's for dimensional. For quantitative literacy, we play this game. We get out a bunch of dice, and we roll, like, have these big foam dice, and they roll them and write down how many times they got. There's 2 dice, so how many times you got the number 6, how many times you got the number 8, 10, 12. Um, and then they graph it, and then we pull all the data together and we graph it, and the graph changes, and we do this like on the whiteboard, in real time, and they're just like, whoa, number 8 is taking the lead. And so for that's a quantitative or numerical literacy where they get to see probability taking into play, but watching what happens when you go from small data to big data, how that can change. And that with just dice, and you go from 10 rolls to 200 rolls, and look how the data changes with that. And for some reason, they just, I thought I was like, I don't know, like at a casino, because they were like, come on, 7, come on. and But it was super fun for them to be, again, cheering and engaged, and making a graph, but not realizing they were making a graph.
And I particularly like that because I think there's some parents that are scared of math, or like they don't feel they're like competent enough, and they don't want to get into things that feels too technical or too sciencey because they don't maybe have confidence for it. But what you describe is like games. It's like playing board games or playing basically with their kids, and yet it has those benefits. So
Yep.
I really like this approach. Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
And it's funny you also mentioned the class you were doing, or the camp, the STEM camp you were doing, where kids were building forts and they never built forts before,
No,
and that's also another activity, right? That helps build that dimensional
it's
literacy.
huge. Yeah. And I think there's a difference between them building with magnet tiles and building a fort. And I think the bigger the three-dimensional object that they're creating, um, it's more of a challenge. But I also think it's more fun for them, right? So sitting on the floor and playing Legos is one thing, but then the big ones, then it becomes this whole thing where it's like, oh, now I understand. And then to get them to sketch their fort, it's a challenge because it's so big. So how do I sketch this big thing? And then we talk about architecture and what architecture is.
Yeah, again, like the cross disciplinary and the possibility to project that into real life
Yep.
is always exciting. And why are they not building forts?
I
I'm just
don't
asking a question, right? Because that's something I feel that all kids, at least, I don't know, in my generation, I feel we all built big forts at some point. Do you have a
It could
sense?
be the subset that I had. So as a scientist, I realized my data set is limited. It might have just been my summer STEM campers who had never done it before. Beyond that, I do think they're building a lot on their screens, right? They've got
Mm,
all those different apps and games that are screen based, right? So they're doing a lot of screen based construction. So it could be
yeah,
that there's just more screen when they have downtime kind of thing. And I had the luxury of having the space to make the fort. Maybe not everybody wants blankets and pillows all over their house,
fair enough.
indefinitely, right? So, so there's a practicality to it. But again, I don't know, but I would encourage. It was something that surprised me, and I'll definitely encourage more fort building and do more fort building in when I'm running camps and things like that.
Yeah. And talking about screens and technology, how do you feel it impacts building up these literacies?
I think what my approach, well, I know what my approach is. My approach is my comic books are paper because I want a child to go out in nature and sit with my comic book under a tree and become molecularly literate, right? Or in the back seat of a car without a screen, or at a soccer game in between matches. So I've intentionally created things that are not screen based because I'd like to provide an opportunity to recapture some of that type of learning. Um, I would say because experientially, as myself, I learned without screens, so that's what I know is how to learn without a screen. I'm not an expert in learning with the screen, so I just don't know, but I suspect that they're going to have more fun. The one thing I realize is screen learning is they sit beside each other and their eyes are ahead. So there's parallel vision. When they're reading my comic books and there's one book, their eyesight's convergent on one object. So it creates more of a community. So I think the
Mm,
screen keeps them from community building because they're going straight ahead. Even if they're playing a game with each other, their eyes are not on each other, right? So how do you get eyes on each other? And that's from, again, ages 4 to 104. How do we get eyes on each other? Again, when you're playing a card game, your eyes are on each other as
yeah.
opposed to a video game. My son plays a ton of video games with his friends, but they're in a different state, right? Eyes aren't
Mm,
on each other. So,
yeah, that's very interesting. It's also building that communal or community aspect, collaborative work as well. So that's also how you envision this. The books is to not have like one book per child, but have them share those
yeah,
books so they work together. Yeah,
yeah,
that's definitely important because I'm thinking. So one way I think, because I'm from more like from the tech world, like I work, in
right.
a tech company, and so I'm thinking, would that help to scale it, right? If you add something that's digital and then you could put that in the hands of like many more children.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you intentionally do books, but do you feel that this is at the cost of not being able to scale it maybe as much as you would, or is that something you prefer to stay with, maybe something that you find is more valuable for the learning and maybe at a smaller scale? Like, what's your approach on that?
That has evolved. When I started, I really drew the line in the sand about screens. And I think it's because a lot of this came out during COVID, and I was teaching online all day long. And so,
Yeah.
I was doing this all the time. My mind has changed, so that's good. Because when I look at really what my goal is for molecular literacy globally, I'm going to have a digital product, and we are creating a digital product for that reason. So, and I'm also being very intentional about creating that. So we're taking steps towards that because I get a lot of requests globally. Um, I taught for a summer in rural Kenya, and my students in Kenya, would like these. And for something to be durable and sustainable in Kenya, it's better to be an ebook, an electronic version, because I've seen the state of their classrooms. They have dirt floors, and things get rained on, books could get destroyed pretty easily. So when I think about these populations that I'm trying to reach, ironically, the more rural, the more remote, it's actually easier to get a digital product to them than a book.
Interesting. Yeah, that's actually interesting too. So how did they react or use your uh, your books in your way of teaching? Because I'm thinking culturally it must like it's very different and the way they learn. And so at the same time it feels that this molecular literacy being its own language is universal. So
Yep.
I'm really interested in like how, if did they engage with it the same way that American students engage with it, or was there some differences?
I would say more so. My students in Kenya, um, they were hungry for knowledge like I've never seen before, right? And also very few of them, go on to secondary school, which is high school, and then university. So um, they value education, and they do this thing where they snap their fingers when they raise their hand, and their hands that go up so fast, like their shoulders are going to come out of their socket when they want to answer a question. and and it's that all the time in the snapping, like, so culturally there was no barrier. I think it was just really their thirst that made me enthusiastic. Sometimes, especially if you're teaching an 8 a.m. college course, you may have some sleepy students, and that's a nice way of saying it. I didn't have any sleepy students in Kenya, right? I could, at any time of day, they recognize the opportunity to learn and what that was, and and what that meant to them. So it was really cool to see that. So
Mm, that's beautiful. Well, thank you. I mean, that's such a fascinating topic, and I could talk for hours. Uh, but I want to get to the last question of our
sure.
conversation, and it is: if you could design a school around one thing, what would it be, and why?
Oh, I would design a school around those five literacies for sure, because I feel like that would empower students to do anything the world presented them with.
Mm,
And I don't think it's the literacies are just scientific literacies, although that's my area of expertise, is how these will impact their ability to become scientists. But I think it's for anything. And I think I would develop a school that doesn't try to predict the future, but looks at what, as a human, what's essential, and really foster those essential foundational skills, and recognizing that what they look like. So my school would be founded on those principles. Oh, also play.
of course,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you have to have play. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Colleen. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Any other thing that you would want to bring up or let the listeners know about your field of study or your approach?
I guess I would just end with, and I'm glad you kind of mentioned the cultural differences. Um, in my recent TED talk, I ended the talk with chemistry isn't just science, it's a shared story of everything. And so if you're listening to this and thinking, well, I don't like science, or my child doesn't want to go into science, or definitely not chemistry, I would revisit the thought with the shared story of everything. When I did my postdoc in France, I couldn't speak French, but I was molecularly literate and could speak in the lab, right?
Mm.
When I was in Kenya, we talked about molecules. Everywhere I worked in Brazil, I don't speak Portuguese. So for me, it has been my own shared story where I could speak that language and get around with people. But I think as a global language, it's really important. So it does transcend beyond science as just a way to be a global citizen. And what it means to be a global citizen, I think, means to be molecularly literate.
Oh, perfect ending. Thank you. That's a great message. Yeah. Where can people find more information about you and your work?
Sure, yeah, I have things on my website. It's kidschemicalsolutions.com. So everything's there. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I am on Instagram at Chemistry Colleen.
Perfect. And I put all the links in the description.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Colleen.
Thank you. It's so fun.